They made me believe I was nothing without them. For 40 years, I cooked their meals, ironed their shirts, and swallowed my dreams while they built their lives on my silence. I was the invisible woman in my own home, until a locked diary and a brass key showed me the truth they'd been hiding all along. This is the story of how I found millions they said didn't exist, and how I finally found myself. Before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you are listening from. I just want to know I'm not alone in this. And if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing. It helps more people become aware of the reality of elder abuse. Now let me tell you what really happened. The smell of vanilla buttercream filled my kitchen that Saturday morning, the same way it had for 41 years of birthday cakes. My hands moved automatically, spreading frosting across the 3-layer cake while my mind wandered to the email confirmation sitting in my purse. Flight to Phoenix. Hotel near my old high school. The reunion I'd been planning for 6 months. Mom, the cake better be ready by 3. Emily's voice cut through my thoughts as she breezed into the kitchen, her designer heels clicking against the tile-eyed mop that morning. And did you pick up the extra folding chairs? I set down the spatula. Yes, honey. Everything's ready. But I wanted to remind you that I'm leaving Monday morning for the reunion thing. She waved her hand dismissively, scrolling through her phone. About that, Dad and I were talking, and we really need you here next weekend too. The Hendersons are coming for dinner, and you know how important they are to Dad's golf club connections. My chest tightened. Emily, I've had this trip planned since March. I already paid for, Mom. She finally looked up and I saw Bill's expression on her face. That particular blend of impatience and condescension I'd come to know so well. You can go to Phoenix anytime. How often do I turn 41? And the Hendersons specifically asked if you'd make your famous pot roast. 41 years old, and she still didn't hear me. Maybe because I'd trained her not to. Maybe because I'd spent her entire life teaching her that my wants came last, that I was the family's convenient fixture, always available, never requiring maintenance. We'll talk about it later, I said quietly, returning to the cake. By 3 o'clock, my house had transformed into Emily's party venue. 30 guests filled the living room and spilled onto the back patio. I moved through them like a shadow, refilling drinks, replenishing appetizer trays, collecting empty plates. Bill held court by the fireplace, telling the same golf stories he'd told at every gathering for the past decade. Joan, we need more ice. He called across the room, not looking at me. I was already halfway to the garage when I heard Aunt Clara's voice behind me. Let someone else get the ice, Joanie. I turned to see her standing in the hallway, leaning on her cane, her sharp eyes studying my face. At 82, Aunt Clara had more fire in her than I'd had at 30. It's fine, I don't mind. That's the problem, honey. You never mind. She moved closer, glancing back toward the living room. Come outside with me for a minute. My hip needs a break from all this noise. We stepped onto the small side porch, away from the party sounds. The April afternoon was mild, and I could hear birds in the oak tree Bill always complained about. Too many leaves to rake, he said. He'd wanted to cut it down for years. I have something for you, Aunt Clara said, reaching into her cardigan pocket. She pulled out a small brass key on a faded ribbon. This belonged to your mother. My breath caught. My mother had passed away 12 years ago when I was 54. What does it open? A diary. Your mother kept it for the last 15 years of her life. She made me promise to give it to you when the time was right. Aunt Clara pressed the key into my palm. I think today is that day. Why didn't you give it to me before? Her weathered hand covered mine. Because you weren't ready to hear what's written in it. But now, Joanie, I've watched you disappear a little more each year. You're 66 years old, and you're still asking permission to live your own life. Your mother saw things. She wrote them down. She wanted you to know the truth. What truth? Aunt Clara's eyes were steady and sad. That you're not crazy. That you're not selfish. That everything you've suspected about Bill all these years, it's real. And it's documented. The porch door opened. Bill's face appeared, irritation etched in every line. Joan, people are asking for the cake. Are you planning to join your daughter's party? Or are you going to hide out here all day? Something in his tone, that automatic expectation of my compliance, made the key feel suddenly heavy in my hand. I'll be right there, I said. But as I followed him back inside, I knew I was lying. I was done being right there. I was done being the invisible woman who made everything work, while receiving nothing in return except criticism and demands. I served the cake. I smiled for photos. I cleaned up wrapping paper and sang happy birthday. And when the last guest finally left at 8 o'clock, I walked upstairs, packed a small bag, and came back down to find Bill settled in his recliner with the television remote. I'm going to Aunt Clara's cabin for a few days, I said. He didn't look away from the screen. You're doing what? I'm leaving. Tonight. I need some time alone. Now he looked at me. Don't be ridiculous. You can't just leave. What about dinner tomorrow? What about the grocery shopping? And you still need to call Emily and tell her you're staying for the Henderson dinner. I felt the key in my pocket, warm against my palm. No, Bill. I don't need to do any of that. I need to do this. His face flushed red. John, I don't know what's gotten into you, but this is completely unacceptable. You have responsibilities. And you and Emily are both adults who can handle your own responsibilities for a few days. I walked out before he could respond. Emily's car was still in the driveway. Through her window I could see her on the phone, probably already calling Bill to complain about my bizarre behavior. Let them complain. Let them figure out their own dinners. Let them realize, maybe for the first time, that I wasn't a piece of furniture that came with the house. I drove north in the darkness, Aunt Clara's directions on the passenger seat, my mother's key in my pocket, and something I hadn't felt in decades rising in my chest. Hope. The cabin appeared in my headlights just after midnight, a small wooden structure nestled between pine trees, exactly as Aunt Clara had described. She'd called ahead to turn on the heat and leave the porch light burning. The key to the front door was under the turtle planter, just like she'd promised. Inside, everything was simple and clean. A stone fireplace, a worn sofa with quilts folded over the back, a kitchen table with 2 chairs. On that table sat a wooden box, about the size of a shoebox, with a note in Aunt Clara's handwriting, "Take your time, Joannie. There's food in the fridge and no one here to disturb you." See, my hands shook as I pulled out the brass key and fitted it into the lock. It turned smoothly, as if it had been waiting all these years for this exact moment. The diary inside was leather, bound, burgundy, with my mother's name embossed in gold on the cover, Margaret Ann Peterson, her maiden name. She'd kept her own name, at least in this private space. I made tea and settled onto the sofa, wrapping myself in one of Aunt Clara's quilts. The first entry was dated September 14, 2007, 3 years before she died. Joan came for Sunday dinner today. Bill barely let her speak. Every time she started a sentence, he talked over her or corrected her. She started apologizing for having opinions. My daughter apologizes for existing in her own life. I wanted to say something, but I know she'd just defend him. She always does. So I'm writing it here instead. Someone needs to witness what's happening to her. I pressed my hand to my mouth. I remembered that dinner. I remembered Bill explaining to everyone why my thoughts on the election were uninformed. I remembered laughing it off, saying I didn't follow politics closely enough to have a real opinion. I remembered my mother's eyes on me across the table, sad and searching. I turned the page. October 3, 2007. I ran into Helen Mitchell at the grocery store. Bill's mother. She mentioned that Bill just purchased a rental property on Cascade Avenue. I almost asked Joan about it at Bridge Club, but then I realized she doesn't know. Her own husband bought property, and she has no idea. I checked county records. The deed is in his name only. How is this legal when they're married? My tea grew cold in my hands as I read entry after entry. My mother had been investigating my life, documenting Bill's financial activities, recording conversations she'd overheard at family gatherings. December 20, 2007. Bill told everyone at Christmas that Joan doesn't have a head for finances, so he handles everything. Joan nodded and smiled like she agreed. But I remember my daughter. She managed the entire accounting department at Henderson and Associates before Emily was born. She balanced books for a company with 50 employees. But she's been convinced she can't even balance a checkbook. The tears came then, hot and angry. Because it was true. All of it was true. Bill had taken over our finances when Emily was born, saying I had enough to handle with a new baby. It was temporary, he'd said. Just until things settled down. 41 years later, I still didn't have access to our bank accounts. I had a credit card for household expenses. With a limit bill set, I had an allowance for groceries. When I needed anything else, I had to ask. I'd convinced myself it was normal. That plenty of couples operated this way. That I was lucky to not have to worry about bills and investments. But my mother had worried, and she dug deeper. March 15, 2008, I hired a private investigator. It cost me $12,000, but I need to know the truth. If something happens to me, this diary goes to Clara with instructions. But if I'm wrong, if I'm just a paranoid old woman, then I'll burn it myself. My heart pounded as I turned to the next entry. It was dated 2 months later, and the handwriting was shakier. May 20, 2008. The investigator's report arrived. I was right. I was right, and I wish I wasn't. Bill has 3 rental properties, all in his name only, collectively worth approximately $880,090, 2 investment accounts at separate banks, totaling $1.2 million, a business partnership and a storage facility company, 40% stake, estimated value $6 to $50,000, a separate checking account where his pension and social security are deposited. Joan's name is not on any of these accounts. The room tilted. I read the words again and again. We lived in a modest house. We drove 10-year-old cars. Bill complained when I wanted to replace our worn couch. He'd told me for years that we had enough to be comfortable, but needed to be careful with spending. and he had nearly $3 million in assets I knew nothing about. June 1, 2008. I confronted Bill today, told him I knew about the properties and accounts. He laughed, actually laughed, said Margaret Joan is provided for. She has everything she needs. This is about securing our future and Emily's inheritance. Joan doesn't need to worry her pretty head about complicated financial matters. I told him it was fraud. He told me to mind my own business. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. Joan will never leave me. She doesn't have anywhere to go, and she doesn't have the spine to try. God help me, I think he's right. And that's what kills me. I set the diary down and walked to the cabin's small bathroom. In the mirror I looked at myself. Really looked. For the first time in years. 66 years old. Gray hair I'd been meaning to color but never found time for. Tired eyes, shoulders curved inward, as if I'd been trying to make myself smaller for so long that my body had permanently adapted. When had I stopped taking up space? When had I started believing I didn't deserve any? I returned to the diary. There were dozens more entries, spanning the 3 years before my mother's death. She documented every dismissive comment Bill made at family gatherings. Every time Emily treated me like hired help instead of her mother. Every time I apologized for existing. She'd also documented everything she'd learned about Bill's hidden assets, property addresses, bank names, account types. She'd even included photocopies of documents she'd obtained. I had no idea how, tucked into envelopes taped to the back pages. The last entry was dated October 8, 2010, 2 weeks before she died. The cancer is in my bones now. I don't have much time left. Joan visited today and spent the whole time fussing over me, making sure I was comfortable, asking what she could do. I wanted to tell her about this diary. But she's not ready. Maybe she'll never be ready. But Clara will know when the time is right. Clara sees things clearly. She never let anyone diminish her, not even after losing Robert. If Joan ever finds the strength to open this diary and read these words, I want her to know you are not crazy. You are not selfish. You are not difficult. You have been systematically erased by a man who saw you as a convenience, not a partner. And baby girl, you deserve so much more. It's not too late. It's never too late to choose yourself. I love you. I'm sorry I didn't fight harder for you when I had the chance. But you can fight for yourself now. Please, fight for yourself. Mom. I closed the diary and pressed it to my chest, sobbing in a way I hadn't let myself sob in decades. My mother had seen me. She'd witnessed my disappearance and documented it like a crime scene investigator collecting evidence. Because it was a crime, maybe not legally, I didn't know yet, but morally. Bill had stolen my autonomy. He'd stolen my financial security. He'd stolen 40 years of partnership and replaced it with servitude. And I'd let him. I'd smiled and nodded and convinced myself it was love. But love doesn't make you small. Love doesn't hide millions of dollars while giving you an allowance. Love doesn't dismiss your dreams as inconvenient. Outside the cabin window, dawn was breaking over the mountains. I'd been reading all night. My phone showed 17 missed calls from Bill and 9 from Emily. I turned it off. I opened my laptop, the old one I'd bought myself 3 years ago when Bill said we didn't need to waste money, on a new computer, and typed into the search bar, elder financial abuse attorney near me. My mother had given me the evidence. Aunt Clara had given me the refuge. Now I had to give myself something I'd been denying for 40 years. Permission to save my own life. I spent Sunday at the cabin, reading my mother's diary 3 more times, taking notes, photographing the documents she'd hidden in the back pages. Each piece of evidence felt like a weapon I was collecting for a battle I'd spent 40 years avoiding. Monday morning I drove into the nearest town, a place called Riverside, about 40 minutes from the cabin. I found a small cafe with internet and ordered coffee I didn't drink while I researched attorneys. Most of the family law offices were closed for the weekend, but I found one firm with a crisis hotline. The recording said someone would call back within 24 hours. I left my information and tried to keep my voice steady. My phone had 63 missed calls now. I'd turned it back on to make the attorney call, and immediately the messages flooded in. Bill's texts were what I expected. This is childish. You need to come home and discuss this like an adult. People are asking questions. But Emily's messages cut deeper. Mom, Dad says you just left without explanation. What's wrong with you? This is really selfish timing with my promotion announcement coming up. I need you to call me back right now. Even now, even after everything I'd read, a part of me wanted to respond. To soothe them. To apologize for causing inconvenience. To shrink back into my assigned role. Instead, I turned the phone off again. At noon, I drove to the Riverside Public Library. The librarian, a woman about my age with kind eyes and purple reading glasses, helped me access the county property records database. Looking for something specific? She asked. My husband's name. William Mitchell. She showed me how to search, then discreetly moved to help another patron. I typed Bill's name with trembling fingers. 3 properties appeared. The one on Cascade Avenue my mother had mentioned, another on Pinehurst Drive, a third, a lakefront lot, in the next county over. Current estimated total value $1.4 million. All 3 deeds showed only his name. In 40 years of marriage I'd never signed a single property deed beyond our primary residence. I printed the records, 50 cents a page, and tucked them into my purse next to my mother's diary. The library computer also let me access my email. There was a message from my bank, the one where I had my small household account that Bill had set up for me years ago. I'd forgotten about the statement notifications. I logged in, the balance was $4.87. My allowance deposit of $500 came every month like clockwork. This account had been the extent of my financial life for 4 decades. On impulse, I opened a new browser window and searched for Bill's name combined with business registrations. The storage facility partnership my mother had discovered appeared immediately: Mitchell & Sons Storage Solutions, LLC. Bill owned 40% of the company alongside 2 other partners, except we didn't have sons. Emily was our only child. The sons in the company name were Bill's business partner's sons. Bill had never even mentioned this business to me. Not once in the 15 years it had apparently existed. I logged out, cleared the browser history, and sat staring at the computer screen. How do you mourn a marriage that never existed? How do you grieve a partnership that was really just servitude with a wedding ring? My phone buzzed in my purse. I turned it back on without thinking. But this time it wasn't Bill or Emily. It was a local number I didn't recognize. Hello, is this Joan Mitchell? A woman's voice, professional but warm. Yes, this is Rebecca Thornton from Thornton & Associates Family Law. I'm returning your call from this morning. You mentioned on the hotline that you needed to discuss elder financial abuse within a marriage. My throat tightened. Hearing it said out loud, elder financial abuse, made it real in a way that terrified me. Yes. I just discovered that my husband has been hiding assets. Substantial assets. For years, maybe decades. Can you tell me more? And Mrs. Mitchell, are you currently safe? Are you in a location where your husband can't overhear this conversation? I'm safe. I'm at a library in Riverside. He doesn't know where I am. Good, that's good. Now, tell me everything. So I did. I told her about my mother's diary, about the properties and investment accounts, about Bill's controlling behavior and 40 years of financial exclusion, about Emily learning to dismiss me the same way her father did. Rebecca Thornton listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a long pause. Mrs. Mitchell, what you're describing is a clear pattern of economic abuse and possible financial exploitation. In our state, assets acquired during marriage are generally considered marital property regardless of whose name is on the title. The fact that your husband concealed these assets and excluded you from financial decisions is a serious issue. Is there anything I can do? Quite a lot, actually, but first I need to ask, are you considering divorce? The word hung in the air between us. Divorce. At 66, after 40 years, I don't know, I whispered. I just know I can't go back to the way things were. You don't have to decide today, but here's what I recommend. First, we need to document everything you've discovered. Second, we need to secure your access to marital assets, bank accounts, credit cards, information. Third, we need to determine the full scope of your husband's hidden assets. And fourth, we need to establish your rights and options. How much does this cost? I thought of my household account. I only have about $500. We can discuss payment plans and options. Many of our clients in situations like yours have limited immediate access to funds. We work with that reality. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning? Say 10 o'clock? Yes, I can do that. Excellent. And Mrs. Mitchell, bring that diary and any documentation you have. What your mother did, documenting everything, that was an act of love. She built you a foundation to stand on. Now we're going to help you build the rest. When I hung up, my hands were shaking so badly I had to sit for 10 minutes before I could stand. The purple glasses librarian appeared with a cup of water. You okay, honey? I think so. I think I'm going to be. She patted my shoulder. Good. You take your time. The library's open until 6. I stayed until closing, using the computer to research divorce law, financial abuse, and marital property rights. I learned terms I'd never heard before: dissipation of marital assets, fraudulent concealment, economic coercion. Each term described my marriage. That evening, back at the cabin, I finally turned my phone on and read through all the messages. Bill's had evolved from annoyed to angry to strategic. John, I've been very patient, but this needs to end. Come home and we'll discuss whatever is bothering you. I'm willing to overlook this episode if you return by Wednesday. After that, there will be consequences. You're embarrassing yourself and this family. Emily is very upset. The threats were clear. But for the first time in 40 years, they didn't land. Because I had something Bill didn't know about. I had evidence. I had an attorney. I had my mother's voice from beyond the grave telling me I deserved better. And I had Aunt Clara, who called just as the sun was setting over the mountains. How are you holding up, Joanie? I'm terrified. But I think I'm angry. Really, really angry. Good. Anger is fuel. Use it. I met with an attorney tomorrow morning. In Riverside. I know. Rebecca Thornton, right? I called her office this morning and told them to expect you. She's the best, honey. She helped my friend Dorothy get out of a similar situation 3 years ago. You've been planning this. No. Your mother was planning this. I'm just making sure her plan reaches the finish line. Now listen, you stay at that cabin as long as you need. Don't let Bill or Emily guilt you into coming back before you're ready. You hear me? And Joanie, I'm proud of you. Your mother would be proud of you too. After we hung up, I sat on the cabin's small porch and watched the stars emerge. Somewhere in the city, Bill was probably calling everyone we knew, painting me as irrational, unstable, going through some kind of breakdown. Let him talk. Let him spin his version of events. I had the truth. And the truth had documentation. Tomorrow, I would walk into Rebecca Thornton's office and start building my case. I would stop being the invisible woman who made everyone else's life comfortable while having no life of her own. I was 66 years old, and I was finally going to fight for myself. My mother had handed me the sword. Now I just had to learn how to swing it. Rebecca Thornton's office was nothing like I expected. I'd imagined cold, corporate spaces with intimidating leather furniture. Instead, I found a converted Victorian house with soft yellow walls, comfortable chairs, and photographs of mountains on every wall. Rebecca herself was in her mid-50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun, and the direct gaze of someone who'd heard every story and believed every survivor. Mrs. Mitchell, come in. Can I get you coffee? Tea. Water is fine. Thank you. She led me to a conference room where another woman was waiting. Younger, maybe 35, with sharp eyes and a laptop open in front of her. This is Sarah Chen, our forensic accountant. Based on what you told me yesterday, I asked her to join us. Everything we discuss here is confidential and protected by attorney-client privilege. You understand? I nodded, clutching my purse where my mother's diary waited. Good. Now, show us what you have. I spread everything on the table. The diary. The photographs of documents my mother had collected. The property records I'd printed at the library. My bank statements showing the monthly 500 allowances. Rebecca and Sarah examined each item methodically, occasionally making notes or taking photographs with Sarah's phone. Your mother was thorough, Sarah said finally. These documents from 2008 give us a starting point, but we'll need to determine what exists now, 17 years later. Property values have likely increased. Investment accounts have grown. There may be additional assets acquired since your mother's investigation. How do we find out? I asked. Several ways. In a divorce proceeding, both parties are required to provide complete financial disclosure. We'll file interrogatories, formal questions your husband must answer under oath. We'll subpoena bank records, property records, business documents. And we'll depose your husband, which means questioning him directly with a court reporter present. The thought of Bill being questioned, being forced to reveal what he'd hidden, sent a strange mixture of fear and satisfaction through me. Rebecca leaned forward. But before we get to that, I need to ask you something important. What do you want, Joan? Not what you think you deserve, not what seems reasonable. What do you actually want? No one had asked me that question in so long that I didn't have an answer ready. I don't know. Then let me ask it differently. Do you want to save this marriage? Do you want counseling, reconciliation, a chance to rebuild trust? I thought of Bill's texts, the threats, the condescension, the 40 years of being made to feel small and inconvenient and less than. No, I don't want to save it, I want out. Okay? Do you want to stay in your current house? I pictured our house, every room filled with memories of being dismissed, every corner associated with my own disappearance. No, I never want to see that house again. Do you want a relationship with your daughter after this? That question broke something open in my chest. Emily, my baby girl who'd learned to treat me the way her father did. I want her to see me, really see me, not as her personal assistant or her father's wife, but as a person. If she can't do that. I took a shaky breath. Then I guess I want distance from her too. Rebecca nodded, no judgment in her expression. Here's what I think: we should pursue a divorce with full financial discovery, equitable distribution of all marital assets including the properties and accounts your husband concealed, and possibly a claim for damages related to financial abuse. You're entitled to half of everything acquired during the marriage, plus potentially more given the fraud involved. How long will this take? 6 months to a year, possibly longer if your husband fights it. And Joan, he will fight it. Men like your husband don't give up control easily. Sarah pulled up something on her laptop. Based on the 2008 valuations your mother documented and applying average appreciation rates, we're likely looking at current assets worth somewhere between $4 and $5 million. That's a conservative estimate. Half of that is $2 to $2.5 million. The number was so large it didn't feel real. I don't need millions. I just need enough to live independently. It's not about need, Rebecca said firmly. It's about what you're legally entitled to. Your husband built wealth during your marriage while you handled the home, raised your daughter, and supported his career. That labor has value. Those assets are partially yours whether he acknowledges it or not. What do I do first? First, we file for divorce. That starts the legal process and the clock on financial discovery. Second, we file a motion for temporary support so you have funds to live on during the proceedings. Third, we begin the forensic accounting investigation to uncover all hidden assets. And fourth, she paused, we prepare you for what's coming. Because your husband will retaliate. He'll try to control the narrative. He'll paint you as unstable, ungrateful, perhaps mentally unwell. He'll use your daughter as a weapon. He'll make this as painful as possible, hoping you'll give up and settle for less than you deserve. I won't give up. I believe you. But it's important you know what you're walking into. This isn't just a legal battle, it's psychological warfare. You'll need support. Do you have friends, family besides your aunt? I thought of my social circle. All couples Bill and I knew together, women I had lunch with occasionally but never shared real feelings with. Had I even had a genuine friendship in the past 20 years? Not really, just Aunt Clara. Then we'll connect you with a therapist who specializes in emotional abuse. You'll also want to consider joining a support group for women leaving controlling relationships. You're going to need people who understand what you're going through. Sarah handed me a folder. I've prepared a list of documents we'll need you to gather any financial papers you have access to, tax returns from the past 7 years if possible, insurance policies, retirement account statements, anything that shows what your household actually owns. And Bill keeps all that in his home office, in locked filing cabinets. Do you have keys? No, he's the only one with keys. Rebecca and Sarah exchanged a look. Okay, Rebecca said. We'll need to address that during discovery. For now, focus on what you can access. Do you have copies of joint tax returns? I sign them every year, but Bill gives them to the accountant. I never keep copies. We'll subpoena those from the IRS. What about retirement accounts? Do you know if your husband has a 401k or pension from his years working? He has a pension. He retired 5 years ago. But I don't know any details. Sarah made notes. We'll find all of it. Financial records leave trails, and your husband clearly didn't expect you to ever look. That works in our favor. We spent 2 more hours going through everything. Rebecca explained the divorce process, filing, service of papers, temporary hearings, discovery, mediation, and possibly trial. Sarah walked me through what forensic accounting would uncover and how long it might take. By the time I left at 1 o'clock, my head was spinning but my resolve was solid. In the parking lot, I turned my phone back on. 23 new messages. I ignored them all and called Aunt Clara. How did it go? I'm filing for divorce tomorrow. There was a pause, then Aunt Clara's voice came back thick with emotion. Oh honey, your mother would be dancing. What do you need? Rebecca says I need support. People who understand. Then you've got me. And I'm calling the ladies from my bridge club. Dorothy went through something similar. Linda left her husband after 40 years. Patricia's daughter is a therapist. You're not alone in this, Joannie. Not anymore. That evening, back at the cabin, I did something I hadn't done since college. I started a journal. Not documenting someone else's crimes like my mother had, but documenting my own rebirth. Day 5 of my new life. I wrote at the top of the first page. Today I hired an attorney. Today I said out loud that I want a divorce. Today I started fighting for myself. I'm terrified, but I'm also awake. For the first time in 40 years, I'm fully awake. My phone buzzed. Bill's name appeared on the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered. Joan, this has gone on long enough. I'm filing for divorce, Bill. Silence. Then, you're what? I'm divorcing you. My attorney will serve you papers this week. You can't be serious. Over what? Some ridiculous tantrum because you didn't get to go to a reunion. No. Over 40 years of financial abuse. Over hidden properties and accounts I knew nothing about. Over being treated like an employee instead of a partner. Over being erased in my own marriage. His voice changed, became harder. I don't know what nonsense you've been filling your head with, but you're making a serious mistake. You have no money, no job, no prospects. You'll get nothing in a divorce, and you'll end up in some assisted living facility eating cat food. We'll see about that. Joan, I'm warning you. No, Bill. I'm done with your warnings. I'm done with your threats. I'm done shrinking myself to fit into the tiny space you decided I deserved. Goodbye. I hung up before he could respond and immediately blocked his number. Then I blocked Emily's too. It felt like jumping off a cliff. Terrifying and exhilarating and utterly irreversible. I was 66 years old and I was finally free, falling into my own life. The process server delivered the divorce papers to Bill on Thursday morning. I know because Rebecca called me at 10:47 a.m. to confirm service had been completed. He was served at the house. The server said he turned red and started yelling, but he took the papers. You're officially in the system now, Joan. How are you feeling? Like I just set off a bomb. You did. The explosion is coming. Are you somewhere safe? Still at the cabin. Aunt Clara's with me now. Good, stay there. Don't respond to any contact from Bill or Emily unless it's an actual emergency. Everything goes through me now. Understand. The explosion Rebecca warned about arrived within an hour. My phone, I'd had to unblock the numbers temporarily to receive a call from my dentist, erupted with messages. Emily's came first. Mom, what the hell is this? Dad just called me sobbing. Sabi I am. You filed for divorce without even talking to us. Who are you? This is insane. This is cruel. Do you have any idea what you're doing to this family? Dad says you're accusing him of hiding money. He showed me the bank statements. He's been provident for you for 40 years and this is how you repay him. I'm ashamed to call you my mother right now. Each message felt like a slap. Aunt Clara reading them over my shoulder made a disgusted sound. That girl needs a reality check. She thinks I'm the villain. Of course she does. Bill's been training her to think that since she was old enough to talk. But she's 41 years old, Joanie. At some point, she's responsible for her own cruelty. Bill's messages were different, calculated, manipulative. John, I know you're confused and someone has put ideas in your head. Please, let's talk before you destroy our family. I love you. I've always loved you. We can work through this. I'm willing to go to counseling, to make changes. Just withdraw the divorce papers and come home. Please. The house feels empty without you. I miss you. Don't let some lawyer destroy what we built together. Then, when I didn't respond, the tone shifted. Fine. If this is what you want, you'll regret it. My attorney says you have no case. You'll walk away with nothing. Emily won't speak to you after this. You're choosing to lose your daughter. Everyone knows you've lost your mind. Patterson said he's not surprised. Women your age often have mental breakdowns. That last one made my hands shake. Dr. Patterson was our family physician. Bill had already started spreading the narrative that I was mentally unstable. Aunt Clara took the phone from me and blocked both numbers again. That's enough of that poison. Is telling everyone I'm crazy. Let him talk. When the truth comes out in court, he'll be the one who looks like a fool. But it wasn't that simple. By Friday evening, my email inbox was full of messages from people in our social circle, Bill's golf club friends, couples we'd had dinner with, even the woman who ran our church's women's auxiliary. Most were some version of Joan. We heard about the separation. We're praying for you and hope you'll reconsider. Bill seems devastated. No one asked for my side of the story. No one questioned Bill's version of events. I'd been invisible for so long that now, when I was finally taking up space, everyone wanted me to disappear again. The only person who reached out with genuine concern was someone I barely knew. Diane, a woman I'd met at a library book club 2 years ago. We'd exchanged numbers but never actually gotten together. Her email said simply, John, I heard you've left Bill. I don't know your situation, but I left my husband after 30 years and it was the best decision I ever made. If you need someone to talk to who won't judge, I'm here. Deanne. I stared at that email for a long time before responding. Thank you. I might take you up on that. Saturday morning, Rebecca called with an update. Bill's attorney filed a response. He's denying all allegations of financial abuse and claiming all assets were acquired and managed for the benefit of the marriage. He's also requesting that you undergo a psychiatric evaluation. What? It's a common tactic. He's trying to paint you as mentally incompetent to make legal decisions. We'll fight it and we'll likely win. Judges see through this strategy, but I need you to be prepared. He's going to attack your credibility, your mental state, your motivations. Anything to avoid addressing the actual financial issues. I'm not crazy. I know that. The documentation your mother left proves you're not crazy. It proves you're finally seeing clearly. But we should have you evaluated by our psychologist, Dr. Miranda Walsh. She specializes in abuse cases and can provide an expert opinion to counter Bill's claims. Okay. When? I'll set it up for early next week. In the meantime, Sarah's been pulling records. We've confirmed the 3 properties and traced 2 of the investment accounts. But there are some irregularities in Bill's tax returns that suggest additional income sources. We're digging deeper. After the call, I sat with Aunt Clara at the cabin's kitchen table, drinking coffee and watching birds at the feeder outside. You know what the worst part is? I said finally. I spent 40 years making myself small so Bill could feel big. I convinced myself it was love. That it was partnership. That it was what marriage looked like. It's what you were taught marriage looked like. Your father was a good man, but he was a product of his time. Your mother managed the house and the children, and he made the decisions. You absorbed that pattern, but you didn't. You and Uncle Robert had a real partnership. Aunt Clara smiled sadly. Robert and I had our own struggles, but yes, we talked about money. We made decisions together. When he died, I knew exactly what we had and where it was because we were actual partners. That's what you deserve, Joanny. That's what Bill stole from you. Do you think Emily will ever understand? I don't know, honey. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones we love the most. Emily might come around eventually, or she might not. But you can't stay in a prison just to keep your warden's daughter happy. That afternoon I took a walk on the trail behind the cabin. The April air was cool and sharp, and the mountain laurels were just starting to bloom. I walked for an hour, letting my thoughts settle. I thought about the woman I'd been at 26, marrying Bill. I'd been confident then, capable, full of plans. I was going to keep working, maybe go back to school for my MBA, travel to Europe. None of that happened. Bill needed someone to host his work dinners. Then Emily needed a full-time mother. Then Bill's career needed support. Then his aging parents needed care. Then Emily's wedding needed planning. Then grandchildren were expected. My life became a series of other people's needs, and somehow, in the process of meeting them all, I forgot I had needs too. But I was remembering now. When I got back to the cabin, there was an email from Sarah Chen with the subject line, "Preliminary findings. Confidential." I opened it with shaking hands. "We've completed the initial asset trace. Confirmed so far 3 rental properties. Current value 2.1 million, investment accounts at 2 banks totaling 1.8 million, storage facility business stake now worth approximately 950,000, pension with survivor benefits valued at 780,000, additional checking savings accounts totaling 340,000, total confirmed marital assets 5.97 million, still investigating possible offshore account found, reference in 2019 tax return, potential 4th property deed trail incomplete, an unexplained annual income of 60-80K from unknown source. Your share of confirmed assets approximately 2.98 million, plus potentially more depending on what else we uncover. More to come." Sarah, I read it 3 times. Nearly $6 million. Bill had accumulated nearly $6 million while giving me a $500 monthly allowance and complaining about the cost of a new couch. I forwarded the email to Aunt Clara, who was reading on the couch. She read it, then looked at me over her reading glasses. "Well, that's quite a nest egg he built using your labor and your time. I don't even know what to feel. Feel angry. Feel validated. Feel like you made the right choice because, honey, you did." That night I wrote in my journal again, day 8. I found out I'm worth $3 million. Or rather, I found out that half of what Bill hid is worth $3 million. I should feel relieved, vindicated. But mostly I feel grief. Grief for the partnership that never existed. Grief for the 40 years I spent serving a man who saw me as a convenience, not a person. But under the grief, something else is growing. Something that feels like power. Like possibility. Like the beginning of a life I was always meant to live. I'm 66 years old. If I'm lucky, I have 20 or 30 more years. I'm going to make them count. Outside, the mountain darkness was complete, but inside the cabin, I was finally beginning to see clearly. Miranda Walsh's office was in a converted brownstone in downtown Riverside, with walls painted in calming sage green and shelves full of books about trauma, resilience, and healing. She was younger than I expected, maybe 50. With warm brown eyes and the kind of stillness that made you want to talk. "Joan, I've reviewed the documentation your attorney provided, including excerpts from your mother's diary. Before we discuss the legal evaluation Bill's attorney requested, I'd like to hear your story in your own words. Not for the court. Just for you." So I told her. Everything. The slow erosion of my identity. The financial control. The dismissive comments that accumulated over decades like sediment, burying the woman I used to be. The way Emily learned to treat me like her father did. The shame I felt for not leaving sooner. The fear that I was overreacting, being dramatic, throwing away a perfectly good marriage over nothing. Dr. Walsh listened without interrupting, occasionally taking notes. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "What you've described is a textbook case of coercive control and economic abuse. You're not crazy. You're not overreacting. You're having a completely rational response to 4 decades of systematic manipulation. Then why do I feel guilty? Why do I wake up at 3 in the morning wondering if I'm making a mistake? Because he trained you to feel that way. Abusers? And yes, what Bill did was abuse. Are experts at making their victims believe they're the problem. You've been gaslit for so long that even now, with evidence in your hands, part of you still questions your own reality. That's not weakness. That's the result of prolonged psychological manipulation. Will that ever go away? With time and work, yes. But Joan, I need you to understand something. You're not leaving a person. You're escaping a system. Bill created a system where your only value was in serving his needs. Emily was raised in that system and internalized its rules. When you disrupt that system by asserting your own needs, their reality collapses. That's why they're reacting so violently. You're not just asking for a divorce. You're dismantling the entire structure of their worldview. So they'll never understand. They might, eventually. Or they might not. But Joan, you can't set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. You've spent 66 years doing that. It's time to stop. The evaluation took 3 hours. Dr. Walsh asked hundreds of questions, administered psychological tests, and reviewed my medical history. At the end, she looked at me with something like admiration. I'll submit my report to the court. For what it's worth, you're one of the psychologically healthiest people I've met. You have clarity, insight, and appropriate emotional responses to an abusive situation. Bill's attorney won't get the incompetence ruling he's hoping for. Thank you. Joan, one more thing. Have you thought about what comes after? After the divorce is final, after you have your settlement, after the legal dust settles? I don't know. I can't see that far ahead yet. Start thinking about it. Because you're about to have something you haven't had in 40 years: choices. Real choices. About where you live, how you spend your time, who you spend it with. That freedom can be overwhelming after so long without it. Some people self-sabotage because they don't know how to exist without someone controlling them. Don't be one of those people. Her words stayed with me as I drove back to the cabin. What did I want? Not what I was running from, but what I was running toward. That evening, Aunt Clara and I made dinner together, something I'd rarely done for pleasure in my own house, where cooking was just another chore on an endless list. We made pasta with fresh vegetables from the farmer's market and drank wine on the porch while the sun set. I got an email from Diane today. I told her. The woman from book club. She invited me to coffee next week. Are you going to go? I think so. Is that strange? Making a new friend at 66. Honey, my best friend right now is Dorothy, and I met her 3 years ago at physical therapy. We bonded over our mutual hatred of knee replacement exercises. Friendship doesn't have an age limit. I don't know how to do this. How to be a person outside of being Bill's wife or Emily's mother. You learn. One coffee date at a time. One decision at a time. One day when you wake up and realize you're happy. The next morning, Rebecca called with news. Bill's attorney has proposed mediation. They want to settle without going to trial. Why? Because Sarah's forensic accounting is turning up things they don't want exposed in open court. We found the offshore account. It's in the Cayman Islands. Opened in 2015, current balance approximately $680,000. We also found a fourth property, a condo in Florida that Bill purchased 3 years ago. He's been renting it out and not reporting the income. That's illegal, isn't it? Very. Tax evasion, failure to disclose marital assets, fraudulent concealment. If this goes to trial, Bill doesn't just lose the divorce. He potentially faces criminal charges. His attorney knows this. That's why they want to mediate. What does mediation mean? We all sit in a room with a neutral mediator and negotiate a settlement. You'd get your share of assets without the time and expense of a trial. But Joan, and this is important, we only settle if the terms are favorable. We don't accept less than you deserve just to avoid conflict. Win. 2 weeks. Can you handle being in a room with Bill? I thought about the woman I'd been 8 weeks ago, the one who would have shrunk under Bill's glare, who would have apologized for breathing too loudly. Yes, I can handle it. The days before mediation passed in a strange blur. I met Diane for coffee, and we talked for 3 hours, about books, about failed marriages, about starting over. She'd left her husband at 58 and spent the last 8 years building a life she actually wanted. The first year was terrifying, she told me. I cried every day. But somewhere around month 13, I woke up and realized I'd gone a whole week without that knot in my stomach. Without waiting for someone to criticize me or tell me I was doing everything wrong. That's when I knew I'd made the right choice. I joined a support group for women leaving long-term marriages. Sitting in that circle of women, ranging in age from 40 to 78, I realized I wasn't alone. Every woman there had a version of my story. Different details, same structure: slow erasure, financial control, the loss of self. And I started planning. Not just for the divorce but for after. I looked at small houses in towns I'd never lived in. I researched writing classes and travel groups for solo women. I made a list titled, Things I Want to Do, and filled it with items that ranged from, take a painting class, to visit Japan, to eat ice cream for dinner without apologizing. The night before mediation I barely slept. At 2 a.m. I reread my mother's final diary entry. It's not too late. It's never too late to choose yourself. I wrote a response in my journal, as if she could read it. Mom. I'm choosing myself. Finally, I'm terrified, but I'm doing it. Tomorrow I face Bill across a table and demand what's rightfully mine. Not just money, but acknowledgement, recognition that I existed, that I mattered. That 40 years of my life had value. I wish you were here to see this. But in a way you are. Your diary is my armor, your love is my courage. Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I'd given up on myself. I love you. Joan. Mediation was scheduled for 9 a.m. at a neutral office downtown. Rebecca picked me up at the cabin at 7:30. Remember, she said as we drove, this is a negotiation. Bill will try to intimidate you. He'll use the same tactics that worked for 40 years, making you feel guilty, unreasonable, selfish. Don't engage, let me do the talking. Your job is to sit there, remain calm, and remember your worth. What if I panic? Then we take a break. We can leave at any time. You're in control here, Joan, not him, not anymore. The mediation office was aggressively neutral, beige walls, generic landscape paintings, a conference table with water bottles and legal pads. Bill was already there with his attorney, a stern-looking man in his 60s named Gerald something. I hadn't seen Bill in person for 3 weeks. He looked smaller than I remembered. Older, his face was drawn and there were new lines around his mouth. For a split second, I felt the old instinct. To comfort him, to apologize, to make it better. Then his eyes met mine and I saw it, the anger, the contempt, the absolute certainty that I was the one being unreasonable. The feeling passed. Rebecca squeezed my hand under the table. "You've got this," she whispered. The mediator, a woman named Patricia with a no-nonsense demeanor, explained the process. Each side would present their position. We'd negotiate terms. Hopefully, we'd reach an agreement. Gerald spoke first, painting Bill as a devoted husband who'd worked hard to provide for his family. He claimed the hidden accounts were investment strategies that Joan wouldn't have understood. He suggested Bill keep 70% of assets since he'd earned them. I watched Rebecca's face harden. When it was her turn, she was devastating. She laid out every hidden property, every offshore tax evasion, the Florida condo's unreported income, the 40 years of economic control. She cited case law about fraudulent concealment and dissipation of marital assets. Your client, she said coldly, didn't just fail to include Joan in financial decisions. He actively deceived her, hid assets, and committed tax fraud. Joan is entitled to 50% of all marital assets at minimum, plus potentially compensatory damages for economic abuse. If we go to trial, she'll likely get more, and Mr. Mitchell will likely face criminal charges. Bill's face went from red to white. Gerald leaned over and whispered urgently to him. Bill shook his head. They argued in hushed tones. Finally, Gerald said, "We'd like a recess." 20 minutes, Patricia said. In the break room, Rebecca smiled grimly. They're panicking. The criminal charges threat landed. Will he actually be charged? Possibly. Tax evasion is serious, but our leverage right now is the threat. He wants to avoid criminal court more than he wants to keep his money. When we reconvened, Gerald's tone had changed. My client is prepared to offer a 50-50 split of all marital assets, including the properties and accounts in question. In exchange, Mrs. Mitchell agrees not to pursue criminal charges or damages claims. Rebecca looked at me. I nodded. We'll need a full accounting of all assets, including the offshore account and the Florida property. And Joan gets first choice of which assets she wants. Liquid accounts preferred. They negotiated details for another hour. Bank accounts versus properties. Pension splits. The house. Bill would keep it and buy out my share. Timeline for asset transfers. Finally, Patricia said, "Do we have an agreement?" Gerald looked at Bill, who stared at the table and nodded once. "Yes," Gerald said. "Joan?" Patricia asked. I looked at Bill, really looked at him. This man I'd spent 40 years with. This stranger I'd never actually known. "Yes," I said. "We have an agreement." Bill stood abruptly and walked out without looking at me. In the parking lot, Rebecca hugged me. "You did it. You actually did it. Is it really over? The hard part is, we'll finalize paperwork, transfer assets, process the divorce decree. But yes, Joan, you're free." I called Aunt Clara from the car. "How did it go?" "I got half. It's over." She was crying. "Your mother would be so proud." "I'm so proud. Clara. I think I want to buy a house by a lake. Maybe take that writing class. Maybe go to Japan. Then do it, honey. Do all of it. You've earned it." That night, I stood on the cabin porch and watched stars appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the city, Bill was probably raging about the injustice of it all. Somewhere, Emily was probably telling people her mother had destroyed the family. But here, in the quiet mountains, I felt something I hadn't felt in 40 years. Peace. 6 months later, I stood on the deck of my new home, a small cottage overlooking Lake Morrison, 2 hours north of the city, where I'd spent 40 years disappearing. The morning sun turned the water gold, and a heron stood motionless in the shallows, patient and self-contained. I'd named her Patience, the heron I mean. She showed up most mornings around 7, and I'd started timing my coffee to coincide with her arrival. We had an understanding, Patience and I. We were both learning how to stand still without apologizing for taking up space. The cottage was nothing like the house I'd left behind. It was small, just 2 bedrooms, a cozy living room with a stone fireplace, and a kitchen with windows overlooking the water. But it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every paint color, every book on the shelves, I'd chosen them all. The first month after the divorce was finalized had been the hardest. I'd moved into a temporary apartment while house hunting, and the silence had been deafening. No one asking what was for dinner. No one criticizing how I folded towels. No one at all. I'd called Aunt Clara crying at 2 in the morning. I did the right thing, didn't I? Honey, you did the only thing. Now you have to learn how to live with freedom. That takes time, she was right. Freedom, I discovered, required practice. I practiced making decisions without asking permission. I ate breakfast at noon and dinner at 9. I left dishes in the sink overnight. I bought expensive cheese and cheap wine and didn't justify either purchase to anyone. I practiced disappointing people. When old acquaintances reached out with thinly veiled curiosity about the divorce, I politely declined to provide details. When Emily sent a message demanding I explain myself, I wrote back, "I'm sorry you're hurt. I hope someday you'll understand. But I can't explain what you're not ready to hear. I love you, Mom." She didn't respond. I practiced saying yes to myself. To the watercolor painting class at the community center. To the women's writing group that met Tuesday evenings. To Diane's invitation to join her book club. To the travel group planning a trip to Vietnam and Japan in the spring. I practiced being alone without being lonely. Some days I succeeded, some days I failed. But I was learning. The settlement had given me $3.2 million. Rebecca had negotiated brilliantly, getting me more than half because of Bill's fraud and concealment. After taxes and attorney fees, I had enough to buy the cottage outright, invest for retirement, and live comfortably for the rest of my life. I didn't need Bill's money. I never had. But claiming my share wasn't about need, it was about acknowledgement. Those assets represented 40 years of my labor, my time, my sacrifice. Taking half meant saying I existed, I mattered. My life had value. The cottage had cost $380,000. I'd written the check myself and cried in the title company office when they handed me the deed with only my name on it. First home. The title agent had asked kindly. First home that's actually mine. I'd answered. I furnished it slowly, deliberately. A comfortable reading chair for the living room. A desk overlooking the lake where I could write. Guest room furniture. Aunt Clara had already visited twice and Diane was coming next weekend. On the mantel I'd placed 2 photographs. One of my mother, young and smiling, from before marriage and children dimmed her light. The other of myself at 25, before I learned to make myself small. Between them sat my mother's diary, retired now from its role as evidence but forever sacred. The writing group had been Diane's idea. 8 women, ranging in age from 42 to 76, meeting at the library every Tuesday to share stories and encourage each other's work. "What are you writing?" they'd asked at my first meeting. "My story," I'd said. About leaving a 40-year marriage. About finding evidence of financial abuse. About choosing myself. "Is it fiction?" someone asked. "No, it's survival." They'd gotten it. Every woman in that room had her own version of my story. Maybe not financial abuse, but some form of erasure. Some pattern of putting everyone else first until she disappeared. Writing it down was harder than I expected. Not the facts, those were documented, provable. But the feelings. The shame of staying so long. The grief for the partnership that never existed. The anger at all the years I'd lost. Dr. Walsh, who I still saw monthly, said writing was healing. You're creating a narrative where you were silenced. You're bearing witness to your own experience. That's powerful, Joan. I'd written 70 pages so far. I didn't know if anyone would ever read it besides me and the writing group. But that wasn't the point. The point was having a voice. The point was finally being heard, even if only by myself. Emily hadn't spoken to me since the divorce was finalized. She'd sent one email, full of accusations and pain. "You destroyed our family. Dad is devastated. Everyone is talking about us. I can't believe you chose money over your own daughter. Don't contact me again." It had hurt more than I wanted to admit. But Aunt Clara had been firm. She's 41 years old. Joan, old enough to ask questions instead of accepting her father's version of events. If she chooses not to see the truth, that's her decision. You can't sacrifice yourself on the altar of her denial. I'd sent one final message, "Emily. I didn't choose money over you. I chose myself after 40 years of not existing. I chose to stop being abused. I chose to claim what was legally and morally mine. I hope someday you'll ask why your father hid millions of dollars from me. I hope someday you'll wonder why he gave me an allowance instead of partnership. I hope someday you'll recognize that love doesn't require you to disappear. Until then, I'll be here. I'll always be your mother. But I won't apologize for saving my own life. I love you, Mom." She never responded. But I'd said what needed saying. The door was open if she ever wanted to walk through it. If not, I'd survive. I was learning that I could survive almost anything. Aunt Clara had moved into a senior living community 30 minutes away. We had lunch every Thursday and called each other most evenings. She'd become more than an aunt. She was my best friend, my cheerleader, my connection to my mother's memory. "Your mother would be so proud," she said every time we talked. "You did it, Joanie. You actually did it. I couldn't have without her diary, without you giving me that key. All we did was show you what you already knew. You did the hard part, you chose to believe your own eyes." The Japan trip was scheduled for April. 12 women, 3 weeks, visiting Tokyo, Kyoto, Hiroshima, and a half-dozen smaller towns. I'd never traveled internationally alone. Bill had always said it was too complicated, or too expensive, or not safe for women our age. But I wasn't our age anymore, I was my age. 66 and getting younger every day. I'd bought new luggage. I'd gotten my first passport. I'd learned basic Japanese phrases from a language app. I was terrified and thrilled in equal measure. The woman leading the tour group had sent an email to all participants. This trip is about more than tourism. It's about claiming space in the world. It's about women who were told to stay small finally taking up room. Welcome to your adventure. My adventure? At 66, better late than never. On Tuesday evenings after writing group, I sometimes drove past my old neighborhood, not to the house. I never wanted to see that house again. But past the park where I used to take Emily as a child. Past the library where I'd once volunteered. Past the streets I'd walked for 40 years invisible. I didn't miss it. Not the life, not the routine, not the person I'd been there. But I acknowledged it. That woman had existed, she'd survived. And she'd been brave enough, finally, to leave. This morning, watching patients hunt in the shallows, I thought about what Dr. Walsh had asked me last week. What does happiness look like for you now? I'd struggled to answer. Happiness felt almost suspicious after so many years of just trying to survive. But sitting here with my coffee, watching the lake, knowing my day belonged entirely to me, maybe this was it. Not fireworks happiness or excitement happiness, just quiet, steady contentment. The knowledge that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. My phone buzzed. A text from Diane, coffee at the Blue Heron at 10, my treat. I have news about the writing contest. I'd submitted a short piece to a local writing contest. A condensed version of my story titled, The Locked Diary. Deanne had encouraged me to enter. I'll be there, I texted back. I finished my coffee, said goodbye to patients who ignored me, as usual, and got ready. The woman in the mirror looked different from the one who'd served cake at Emily's birthday party 7 months ago. Same face, different eyes. These eyes were clear, alert, alive. At the cafe, Diane was already waiting, grinning like she had a secret. You won? She said before I'd even sat down. First place. They're publishing it in the county literary magazine, and you get a 500 prize. I sat down hard. I won. Your story, Joan. People need to hear it. Other women need to know they're not alone, that it's not too late, that they can choose themselves too. I started crying right there in the cafe, and Diane reached across the table and held my hand. Your mother would be so proud, she said. Everyone keeps saying that, because it's true. You took the evidence she left you and you built a whole new life. That's not just survival. That's triumph. Later, driving home along the lake road, I thought about the word, triumph. It felt too big, too dramatic for what I'd done. I hadn't conquered anything, I'd just stopped surrendering. But maybe that was triumph. Maybe victory looked like a small cottage and a writing prize and coffee with a friend. Maybe it looked like choosing what to eat for dinner and not asking permission to exist. Maybe triumph was waking up at 66 and realizing you finally had a life worth living. That evening, I sat at my desk overlooking the lake and opened my journal. I'd kept it faithfully since that first night at Aunt Clara's cabin. Day 217, I wrote. Today I found out my story won a writing contest. Today someone said my words mattered. Today I realized I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm actually living. I'm 66 years old. If I'm lucky, I have 20 or 30 years left. And I'm going to fill them with color and choice and possibility. I'm going to Japan in April. I'm going to keep writing. I'm going to make friends and take risks and eat ice cream for dinner without apologizing. Emily might never speak to me again. That breaks my heart. But I can't go back to being invisible just to maintain a relationship with someone who never really saw me anyway. Bill is somewhere in our old house, probably still convinced I was the one who was wrong. Let him believe that. His reality was never mine. Mom, if you can see me now, I hope you know I'm free. The chains were always unlocked. I just needed to see the key. Thank you for showing me where it was. Thank you for believing I was strong enough to use it. I was wrong about one thing. It's not too late to choose yourself. It's never too late. It's exactly on time. 3 years later, on a spring morning in Kyoto, I stood in a Zen garden watching cherry blossoms drift across still water. I was 69 years old, traveling with my third women's tour group, about to lead a workshop on writing about survival. My book, Unseen Chains: How a Locked Diary Set Me Free, had been published 6 months earlier by a small press that specialized in women's memoirs. It wasn't a bestseller, but it was mine. My voice, my story, finally visible. The advance copies had gone to 2 people: Diane, who'd believed in my words from the beginning, and Emily. Emily had sent a letter in response. Not an apology, exactly, but acknowledgement. She'd started therapy. She'd asked her father hard questions. She'd begun to see the patterns she'd been raised in. I'm not ready to have you back in my life yet, she wrote. But I'm starting to understand why you left. I'm sorry it took me so long to ask. For now, it was enough. Aunt Clara had passed away peacefully in her sleep 8 months after I bought the cottage. Her last words to me had been, "You did good, Joanie. You did so good." I kept her photograph next to my mother's on the mantel. The women who'd saved me. Standing in that Kyoto garden, I thought about the woman I'd been at 66, terrified, broken, certain she'd waited too long. If I could go back and tell her anything, I'd say this: you're not too old. You're not too late. The life you think you've lost is still waiting, but it looks different than you imagined. Better, quieter, fuller, more yours. The chains were never locked. You just had to learn to see them. And once you see them, you'll realize you've had the key all along. A cherry blossom landed on my hand. I let it sit there for a moment, delicate and perfect and temporary. Then I brushed it gently away and walked forward into my day. Free.